starting it in 2015, I just wrote some short stories to start with, and then I thought, no, I'm going to write a novel. And I got my first draft done by about 2017, which is when I went to Uganda. But whilst all that was playing out, obviously we had Brexit, we had Trump come into power, we had the Grenfell tragedy. There were lots of things happening, the Windrush scandal as well. All those sorts of things topically were happening, and it was very strange writing a book about home, about belonging, about what it is to be a citizen and who decides if you're a citizen.
Hello and namaste. Welcome to another episode of Expulsion at 50. My name is Dollar Vasani. In this podcast series, I speak to different people from around the world about their experience of the expulsion of Asians from Uganda. This has been developed to commemorate the 50-year anniversary in 2022. In this podcast, I speak to Neema Shah, the author of Kololo Hill, an intergenerational novel that explores the meaning of leaving one's home, of starting again, and the lengths some will go to protect their loved ones. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation.
My grandparents on both sides went over to East Africa in World War II. And yes, so my mum's family settled in different parts of Kenya, and then my dad in Tanzania, in Arusha. You know, I was born in London, but it very much is, that's my second home to me. The culture and everything is much more recognizable in some ways than certain aspects of India. I've spent a lot of my family holidays, particularly in Kenya, but I also spent time as a very young child for about a year in Tanzania. And in fact, one of the sort of inspirations for the book and for the characters was the fact that my nanny, my mum's mum, came over to Kenya from India. She was 15 or 16, she had a baby on her own during World War II. The lights were out at night because of the blackout. And that just really stuck with me as an idea. I hadn't visited Uganda until I actually wrote the book, but it was, in some ways, it was like coming home, because I'd researched Uganda, and obviously there are some similarities to Kenya and Tanzania in terms of the way of life. Not always in the landscapes, but some of those things are obviously similar, and culture and food and so on. Some of it's similar and some of it is distinctive, actually, and that was really interesting for me to find out what was different about Uganda versus Tanzania and Kenya that I knew much better. In the back of my mind, I thought I wanted to write something about East Africa and about something based on my family experiences. But I also knew from when I was much younger, I had a vague idea of what had happened with Uganda and the Ugandan Asians. And when I learned, when I was probably in my teens or 20s, about this situation of people being, given 90 days to leave. And I remembered the £50, the equivalent that everyone was allowed to leave with. And I remember being so shocked by it even then. And I suppose there was an element of that. And then there was also the element of, as a child, being told, go back to your own country. And then really thinking, like, what is my own country? My parents are born in East Africa, grandparents born in India. I don't know either of those countries well enough to live in them. What is my home? And all of those things, I suppose, amalgamated. And I thought, actually, it'd be really interesting to look at Uganda in particular. And what was also interesting to me was that no one had written, no well-known novels had been written about the Ugandan Asian expulsion, and that surprised me because, especially in the UK, there is, the diaspora stories about Indian immigrants and things like that, but less so about East African Asians. And that was one of the challenges that I had, was trying to get firsthand experiences. So being able to understand what it was like as an individual, as opposed to a political article in a newspaper and so on, was actually quite hard. Some people are really quite hesitant to talk about that time.
Okay, and so the title, where does that come from?
When I first heard about Kololo Hill, just the word, the way it sounds, Kololo, and the way it's written, it's so beautiful, having those O's and L's. I'm a very visual person, and it's very evocative, the meaning behind that word. So I reference it in the novel and how it came to be called Kololo Hill. Basically, there was a tribal leader who was imprisoned and put onto that hill by the British Army, I think it was. He said Kololo, Kololo, and Kololo in that language meant alone. And I thought that was also really interesting as part of the themes of the book, which are about home and belonging and family. So it was just sort of virtuous that it's happened that way. And yeah, it stuck as the title. I'm really pleased. And a lot of what happens obviously is set in Kampala and Kololo Hill, but then it's also, the book then moves to England, obviously. And still there are all the echoes back to Kololo, which was their home for many years. And the characters respond very differently to England. Some thrive, some don't, as happened in reality from my research, for many people.
What would you like your readers to take away from the book?
I hope that they evoke memories for people that lived there before. I didn't intend to write in a polemic, and I didn't intend this to be an overly political novel or anything like that. But equally, I hope it does help to educate the younger generations that are descended from those people that were forced to leave. It's not intended as an educational novel as such, but equally, I have tried to stay true to the politics and the culture and all of that. And I hope that people understand how much value Ugandan Asians brought to Britain. I hope that this sparks more stories. And I hope also, as a child, it was hard to find books about people like me, and it still is actually. So I hope that children and teenagers, maybe it's not children because there are some harrowing bits obviously, but teenagers read it and think, oh, actually, I could write, I could do this, because I never felt I could be a writer when I was younger. It just wasn't on my radar at all. I didn't think it was something that people like me did. So I suppose there's that aspect as well. I hope it inspires others and future generations.
And why is it important to tell the stories?
Well, I think partly it harks back to that idea of topicality. So the fact that history is repeating itself and people forgetting what it is to be a citizen, and also what Ugandan Asians and East Africans gave to the UK in particular. They came over as British citizens, a lot of them. But that's been glossed over, I think, a lot, and is still glossed over. And these things should be taught at school, as far as I can tell, because I think we probably have better race relations. Same way with Windrush scandal and all those other things that have happened. I suppose in Asian culture, and especially traditionally, it wasn't seen as important to tell, to write down history. People were trying to survive, and I wrote about that in my book as well. No one had time to write things down because they were just trying to survive and build new lives. So you don't have time to do those things. But now, whilst there's still people in living memory who went through that, we must capture it.
So Neema, you must be excited to see your book being published. Reflecting on your personal journey, what have been the main lessons that you'd wish to share with us?
I'd certainly got a better understanding of how complex the political situation in Uganda was. And I also learned more about flora and fauna it was very interesting that one of the first lines in the novel, I wouldn't have been able to write it unless I'd been to Uganda. And to be quite honest, that line for me was worth the plane ticket alone, because I talked about in the late afternoon sun that the mosquitoes glowed gold like embers from a fire. As a writer, being able to write there's so many rich details that I can bring into this book. And so I think it's been really important for me and I'm glad that it's my first book.
If you would like to share your personal story for a future episode of Expulsion at 50, please get in touch. The email address is expulsion50@gmail.com or on Twitter @expulsion50. Till next time, take care and stay safe.